Hello and welcome to Commodity Culture, where we break down the commodity space for both new and experienced investors. Before we get started, standard disclaimer: nothing you hear today is investing advice. Do your own due diligence. And today I have my first CEO on the program. It's Galen McNamara from Summa Silver, a silver exploration company with properties in Nevada and New Mexico. Galen, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jesse, thanks very much for having me on.
Absolutely. I wanted to get you on because you're a real silver bug, so you have some great insights into the silver market. But I'd like to get started by diving into your origin story. So, how did you originally get involved in the silver space, and how did that lead you to becoming the CEO of Summa Silver?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have to go back quite a few years here. I mean, I'm a geologist by trade. I was just doing the math the other day, and my first summer when I was still a student doing exploration in Canada was 2004. So I'm coming up on 20 years here in the not too distant future, which is nice. But for me, discovery has always been my thing where, I've always looked for metal deposits of high value, and I've been lucky enough to be on teams where we've had some pretty decent success, in the gold space and the uranium space, where we've made some, very, very, very large discoveries. And for me and for a lot of people like me, I think that's like, you catch the bug, you get that thing that you catch that discovery bug and exploration, and then it sticks with you for life. So that's kind of where I am. I like making discoveries, and I like to think that I know how to do it now. And we've been successful at Sumo. We can talk about that later. And that's where I am. So that, mixed with me being naturally entrepreneurial, I think, was kind of the perfect, fit for me to be the CEO of a small exploration company, which is it's now starting to get some traction and starting to grow just based on the successes we've had. But really that's it. It's I'm probably in this for life, one way or the other. And riding the market roller coaster, as I'm sure we all are. But hey, at least we live in interesting times and work in interesting markets.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll certainly dive into Summa a little later. I'd like to get your broader thoughts on the silver market first. So let's start with the question of what are the tailwinds you see for silver right now, the tailwinds that are working in silver's favor, because there's a lot of negative sentiment out there. So how are you seeing the market at the moment, the potential advantages moving forward?
I see for silver, I see three main drivers. I see silver is a new green metal. It's used a lot in solar panels and in EVs, and more in solar panels going forward. That's number one. Number two, it's a hedge against inflation, although it hasn't been yet. When it is, it will go quickly. We look at all this money printing that's gone on, and most of the U.S. dollars in circulation have been printed since the beginning of the pandemic, and the U.S. dollar has lost 99% of its purchasing power in the last 100 years. I see things like that, and I look to silver. I look to precious metals and silver specifically. And then the last thing is this, the global conflicts. We've got. I think we've been it's actually terrifying. I think we've been as close as we've been to nuclear war, certainly in my lifetime. And all three of those things really, I think, are going to push silver upwards. But when it happens, it's gonna be boring, 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 boom. To quote a friend of mine, it's going to be slowly, slowly, then quickly. So for me, who knows when that's going to happen? But I just keep seeing all these signs that are just quite bullish. So, hey, let's see how the next year goes.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of things working in silver's favor right now. I think people do kind of get stuck in that boring phase where they're tired of waiting forever. So that's certainly an issue. But like you said, when it goes, it really goes. So I do want to get to one of the main gripes of silver investors right away, which is market manipulation. This is a thing that comes up very frequently. Earlier this year, ex-JP Morgan employees were found guilty of manipulating the precious metals market between 2008 and 2016. I believe they got a $900 million fine or something, which for them is basically nothing. And this sort of scenario has unfolded several times now. So firstly, do you think the precious metals markets are manipulated to a degree that strongly affects the price? And if so, what will it take for that manipulation to end?
Well, what's that saying? I think it's Munger that says, "Show me an incentive, and I'll show you an outcome." Well, there's seven or eight concentrated short positions by large financial institutions. And this has been going on for 40 or 50 years, wash, rinse, repeat. But let me give you some information that I think puts it into perspective. Well, like the gold silver price ratio, the price, between gold and silver, something like gold is priced 85 times more than silver. So the price ratio is 85 to 1. Well, I mean, the production ratio gold to silver produced is something like 7 or 8 to 1. So, I just wonder how that difference can be so much. It doesn't make any sense to me on, right on the surface. Um, and the other thing too that is like a big red flag for me is the difference between the physical price and the paper price. Where I think we were seeing premiums like 30-40% in the last couple months, and it's getting hard to find the physical stuff, right? You go on some of these websites and they're sold out of American Eagles. It's like, okay. So I look at those two things and point to the fact that, yeah, there's definitely games being played. There's probably games being played in the entire market, but we look at the history of other commodities in these concentrated short positions. The most obvious example is palladium from a couple years ago, where that had the same type of thing, and then when those positions got unwound and serious demand came into the market, the short sellers got hung to dry. So how does it change, right? How do we change it? It's been so long. And, I looked at things like Silver Squeeze and Wall Street Silver, and those are grassroots movements. I was actually spent a few days with one of the guys on Wall Street Silver, came to site, last week. And it just struck me. He was telling me all about it. And it struck me there's just a real sense of community there. And I think that, that's the start of, how these things can break is number one, big retail buying. Number two, the short positions deciding that they should probably unwind before they lose money and try to, dump their trade onto someone else, right? Because these short positions, I mean, you have to close the trade, you have to roll them over, and at the end of the day, Tony Soprano wants his money, right? So, hey, again, it's just I don't want to sit here and say, hey, it's going to happen tomorrow or it's going to happen next week, but there's a history throughout history of the most recent history of these short positions being smashed in commodities. The most recent one, like I was saying, being palladium, that when it happens, it's going to happen quickly.
Yeah, and when you look at all the fundamentals being so strong and the price being where it is, which I want to get to next, because we did recently see the biggest single day jump in the silver price since November of 2008. But of course, it has come back down again since then. I had Peter Kraut on the show recently, and he mentioned that silver is the only metal that's currently below its 1980 highs, which definitely makes it feel like an opportunity to me. So what are your thoughts on the recent price action and how undervalued silver seems to be today?
Yeah, you know what? It seems we get these spikes and then it kind of comes back down. But that's just, I think, a sign of things to come. And that I think during these times of, all of the things that I was talking about before, the industrial use, the new industrial uses, the inflation pressure, the conflict pressure, that we're going to see some serious volatility in commodities like silver, some very serious volatility as the market and participants try to figure out, what the paper price is actually, valued at. Another thing people ask, I think people think, well, maybe now's the time to be greedy and really back up the truck. But, my kind of feeling there is there's this old saying that pigs get fed and hogs get slaughtered. So we're in this for the long-term game, right? I'm not in the markets or in precious metals or in silver for to buy some today and then a week later it's worth 20% more. I think that's probably not the healthiest marketplace. What I would like to see is kind of a steadier appreciation, as it reacts to actual fundamentals like increased demand, decreased mine supply. I think that's the ideal scenario. It hasn't been like that, but and we'll see what happens. But that's where I'm at with it.
Yeah, I think time horizon is very important, as you touched on there. I think when you alter your time horizon and the expectations change along with it, silver's not a trade where you jump in and hope that it goes to the moon right away. It definitely requires patience. And that brings me to sentiment, as I touched on a little bit earlier. It's at an all-time low. Like I have people in my comment section screaming about precious metals are a scam. I've even been accused of pushing the scam of precious metals by interviewing people about it on my show. Like, how am I benefiting from this? It's pretty funny. But I personally think people, as I mentioned, have too short of a time horizon. They forget the thousands of years of history of silver as sound money. And are you noticing the same bearish sentiment online and around you? And do you think this is a be greedy when others are fearful moment? You mentioned it's not necessarily the time to back up the truck. So do you think there could be more downside to come before we see a correction to the upside?
Well, that's just it. With the volatility being what it is, it could really go either way. And for me, I want to be in it. And hey, I'm in it, way overweight. That's what I'm comfortable with. But in terms of negativity, no, I'm not hearing too much negativity from more sophisticated investors that do think long term. I'm hearing positivity, right? So I think that people are, hopefully starting to chip away at this and potentially add more. And you buy physical silver, I buy physical silver. I've never once bought physical silver and thought to myself, "Oh, that was a mistake." No, I put it away and then I don't think about it, and it sits there and it's on a balance sheet. You can adjust it with its value, but I've never once regretted it. So I just see what's going on in the world and I go, okay, bad times, war, inflation, new demand, and I go, all of that things make me equal. I want to own metals. So that's where I'm at with it.
So silver is a very unique commodity in that it is both a monetary metal and it has a tremendous amount of industrial uses. I don't think a lot of people truly understand or appreciate that. Even before this push for the new green economy started, it's one of the most used commodities in the world. So how much do you think the new green economy and this push for a carbon neutral future is going to really affect the demand for silver moving forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think substantially. I think nobody really understands the amount of silver that's needed for us to increasingly tap zero carbon energy sources. I heard some numbers the other day that were and that were absolutely surprising. But I mean, even let's go back like 20 years. Remember when silver was used in photography for developing photos? And that stopped and everyone went digital, and then all of a sudden, it was going to be a big problem for silver demand, and that was going to have a big effect on it. But here we are a few years later, and now there's new applications for silver that use that electrical conductivity of it. Um, the most important, I think, being solar panels and EVs. So I read a report from the IEA, the International Energy Agency, I think was done in 2020 or 2021, saying that by 2030, right now, silver use industrial solar panels, excuse me, use about 10% of silver produced globally every year. So somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 million ounces, or perhaps a little under that, or a little over that, depending on what you believe the total production numbers are. But by 2030, that should increase to 30%. So, I mean, you're looking at a threefold increase in the next, 5, 6, 7 years, whatever, which that's very substantial. But that even probably underestimates it because there's new solar panel technologies coming out now. There's two that are really being adopted now. First in China, I think one's called TopCon. If you want to Google that, TopCon, where this type of solar panel uses substantially more silver than the last one, and then it's double-sided, so you can get some reflectance. If you're in the desert, you can get some reflectance off the sand, which of course makes a bunch of sense, right? That's easy. So instead of these numbers that say, hey, the IEA is saying, hey, it's going to triple demand for silver for solar panels is going to triple in the next 5 years. Instead of that, it's actually going to be way more because the new solar panels use double or triple the silver. So it could be very, very substantial. And where all this silver is going to come from, who knows? I guess that's for geologists to try to find more. That's number one, and then the other thing, of course, is the electric vehicles, where a little bit of silver goes into every electric vehicle. And if you start thinking about large scale adoption of electric vehicles, which is happening now, I mean, you start to think that I've heard numbers as high as EVs might need the entire global supply of silver to change to 100% EV fleets on the road today in the in places like not just the first world but also in the BRICS countries. So you start to think about that, and I mean, forget about the inflation stuff, forget about the conflict stuff. That right there is just so bullish in the next 5, 6, 7 years for the metal that I don't know where it's all going to come from, but that only should mean that the price should go up. And you listen to people like Keith Neumeyer who coined the term triple digit silver. When you start thinking in those terms, it in terms of how much is going to be needed for green purposes. Like it starts to make sense. You can start to see how people really think that silver could be that high.
So silver, of course, as we touched on, has also had a huge role as money throughout history. And we see a lot of problems happening with fiat currency these days. It stretches way back. Some would argue Bretton Woods. Some would argue when Nixon took the gold backing away from the dollar. But nonetheless, we've seen a consistent depreciation of fiat currencies, including the reserve fiat currency, the US dollar, although it's performing well. As Lobo Tigre has said, it's more like the prettiest mayor at the glue factory, and we could see a reversal ahead for the dominance of the dollar, particularly with the BRICS nations potentially working on a new currency backed by either gold, commodities, a combination of both. But how do you see? Do you see it being possible we could return to sound money as a society? I imagine it would take quite some time before something like that happened, but how would you see that playing out? Because it's difficult to imagine people carrying around silver coins in their pocket. Could we maybe see a blockchain-backed solution for precious metals, or a new currency backed by precious metals in the future?
Yeah, I think it's only a matter of time until that happens. But I mean, first let's talk about, fiat currencies and their depreciation over time, and the US dollar losing 99% of its purchasing power in the last 100 years. Well, all fiat currencies throughout history have failed, right? They end up in that fiat graveyard, every single one. And you start thinking, and the USD has been a great example of it's lasted for so long, but I think we're seeing now with all of the inflation pressure that's happening, if you even believe the numbers that the Fed puts out, right? That we're in a period of great instability. And if you look back through history, I think before the US dollar, the Great British Pound was the reserve currency. And then before that, the Dutch currency was, a reserve currency. Like so all fiats eventually die. And then the other thing is that, our societies and our empires and whoever has power, that moves in cycles as well. And right now it's the US, and it's been the US since the end of World War II, arguably. Which is, you go through that time when, hey, at the end of World War II, pre-Bretton Woods, there was, really it wasn't like we didn't have a hard real currency in terms of we weren't trading metals, but at least the US dollar was backed by metals, right? And the thing is, like you were saying earlier, I mean, hey, look, like silver and gold have been currencies for 5,000 years. So I'll bet on those over any fiat currency in the long term. Of course, we have to live every day, and we use dollars to live. In our society, in Western societies, we've never been as close to nuclear war as we are now, and maybe that'll pass. I hope it'll pass, right? And things will calm down, and people will be sensible enough to de-escalate, although we haven't seen any of that yet. But even going even deeper, I mean, as a society, there's fault lines that have developed between left and right, and between rich and poor, where the gap between the wealthy and the poor in Western society is as high as it's ever been, and it's growing. This is an awful, awful sign, I think. When a new generation of people who live in cities can't buy houses, that's a big problem for society. And if you look back through history, it's that when people are divided, when there's gaps between rich and poor, when the main power base, you can say it's the US. Yeah, it's still a little bit powerful, but I mean, you can just tell there's fault lines developing. That's usually the last step before a lot of instability and a paradigm shift. And we're seeing the rise of China now, the rise of Russia. As Western societies, we seem to be fighting both of them, which is an awful, awful plan. But since and just to put it into perspective, since we normalized relations with China in the 70s, we've been fighting everyone. They haven't been fighting anyone, right? So yeah, I think with that, I'm getting off track here, but for all of this stuff to happen and for us to go back to a silver standard or a gold standard, whatever, it's probably going to mean a lot of hardship for a lot of people that it's hard for me to put into words, but it might mean a big war. It's certainly going to mean a big shakeup, but that's probably the way this is going eventually. So I don't mean to be a dark cloud, but that's kind of how I'm feeling. And again, all these stuff adds up to make me want to own precious metals.
Yeah, and I don't think that would be, casting a dark cloud. I look at that as a pretty realistic assumption, it does take a tremendous amount of pain to make a change like this in society. And although a lot of people are going to suffer in the short term, unfortunately, it's necessary because of the real artificial global economy that we're living in, that has been created by insane government policy. So it's unfortunate, but I do think it's necessary, and I do think something good will come of it in the end. So let's pivot to Summa Silver now. I wanted to start, maybe give us an overview of the company for those who aren't familiar, and touch on your properties in Nevada and New Mexico.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Jesse. So Summa Silver is a relatively new silver-focused exploration company, or discovery company, I'll call it, with projects, high-grade silver projects in Nevada and New Mexico. And these are areas where these two projects that we're working on, they were Wild West style rush towns that really helped shape some of the early history of the United States in the 1800s and early 1900s, where the project in Nevada, it's in a town called Tonopah, Nevada, produced 175 million ounces of silver and almost 2 million ounces of gold over about 50 years. And then the other one in New Mexico called Mogollon, that one was the largest historic silver producer in all of New Mexico. There hasn't been any modern thinking or modern exploration in both of these districts since, maybe pushing 100 years before we showed up. And we just know so much more now than they did then about how to make discoveries. So it kind of, for us, it's just kind of, we're able to skip some steps and start making discoveries right away, which is what we've done.
Nice. And could you talk about some milestones the company has accomplished so far, and what the plans are moving forward, including any notable news flow that's on the horizon?
Yeah, so right now in both the projects, we're in the exploration phase. So what we're doing now is just trying to quantify or see how many ounces are there, and that requires a lot of drilling. So that's what we're doing right now, is that we're in New Mexico drilling a lot of holes. I was just down there last week, and I'm going back again tomorrow. And I saw the core, I saw the result, I saw the visual results, I should say. And we're drilling veins that look like they have quite a bit of silver in them. So that's what we're concentrating on in the next probably year, is really quantifying what we have left, or what could be left remaining there, excuse me. But I think more importantly, like, bigger picture is, when I was a kid in the 80s, there was a Cold War and there was an Iron Curtain, and there was not much flow of goods or services between East and West. And then in the 90s, we had globalization, right? And everybody was friends. And now we're back to conflict, and there's a new Iron Curtain. So for me personally, and for us, we really feel that domestic supply of all of the commodities, critical metals, whatever, silver, gold, whatever, potash, uranium, I think that's very important. And we've let that go in the past little while, where now we get a lot of our critical metals from, places that are not very good, third world dictatorships, where we export jobs to places that use children to mine. We export our money to dictators. And we export our pollution to places that have zero environmental standards. So, I think that working in places and mining in places like the US and Canada, where, environmental standards are very high, employment standards are very high, is very, very important. I think that's the right thing to do. So I'm very much interested in working in the United States. So that's kind of the big picture, why we're doing this, and what the plan is, Jesse. I got a little off track there, but I think that was important to say.
No, definitely. And for those who want to learn more about Summa, there will be a conference coming up on November 22nd online, the Kinvestor Battery Metals and Mining Conference, which will be hosted by myself and Gwen Preston from Resource Maven. So again, that's November 22nd at 9 a.m. The registration link will be on Summa's Twitter, so I'm going to put a link to that below. It'll be on my Twitter, which is also there, so do follow us both so you can stay up to date and hear a more detailed presentation on the company. Thank you so much for joining us, Galen, and I hope to have you on again to continue the conversation.
Of course. Thanks very much, Jesse. Great to talk to you.
Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.